It was a Friday evening, one of those quiet, golden hours when the sun slips through the blinds and paints everything in a soft, forgiving light. The table was set, the smell of roasted chicken filled the room, and for a brief moment it almost felt like the old days when laughter meant comfort, not comparison. But that night something changed. "Dad," my youngest said, swirling his fork in the mashed potatoes, "you seriously bought this chicken on sale again?" There was laughter, quick, light, and cruel. Not the kind that comes from joy, but the kind that leaves small bruises on the soul. I smiled, or at least I tried to. "I did," I said. "Good chicken doesn't need a high price tag." My wife looked down at her plate. She didn't say anything. She rarely did these days when money came up. Across from me, my eldest, Jake, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Come on, Dad," he said. "Every time we go out, you pick the cheapest item on the menu. Every time Mom wants something nice, you say maybe later. You've got money, you just don't like spending it." More laughter. Even my daughter, the quiet one, cracked a smile. They didn't mean harm, I told myself. They were young. They didn't know what things really cost, not money, but effort. I looked around the table, the same table I'd built with my own hands 20 years ago. The same one that had seen birthday candles, spilled milk, and tears over broken hearts. And now it was hosting something different, pride dressed as humor. "I'm just trying to be careful," I said softly. "Saving a little goes a long way." Jake rolled his eyes. Yeah, saving for what, Dad? The apocalypse." The laughter hit harder this time, and that's when I felt it, a slow, dull ache behind my ribs, not anger, something worse. Disappointment. It wasn't that they mocked me. It was that they believed the mockery. They had built this image of me, a miser, a man obsessed with pennies, and I hadn't corrected it. Maybe because part of me hoped one day they'd understand on their own. But that night, as their laughter faded and the clatter of forks filled the silence, I realized they might never understand. I excused myself from the table, said something about checking the garage, an old trick to hide the storm building behind my face. In the dim light of the hallway, I could still hear them talking. "Dad's so cheap," someone whispered. And then, like a punch to the chest, my wife's voice, tired and soft. "He means well, but yes, sometimes it's exhausting." I stopped by the door. There it was, the truth, or at least their version of it. To them, my thrift wasn't love, it was burden. I sat in the garage for a long time. The air smelled of oil and cold metal. My workbench was cluttered with the usual: old receipts, broken tools, a half-empty jar of coins. Those coins. Each one had a story. There was the quarter I'd found under Jake's car seat the day I drove him to his first job interview. The dime I'd picked up outside the community college when I went to pay my daughter's registration fee, the first semester she never finished. And the dollar bill I'd kept folded in my wallet since the day I opened their college fund. People think saving money is about fear, fear of losing, fear of not having enough. But for me, it was hope. Every dollar I didn't spend was a promise I made to my children. You'll have more chances than I did. You'll go further. You won't have to choose between rent and dreams. I thought they'd see it someday. But that night showed me they didn't, not yet. From the kitchen came the faint sound of a dishwasher starting up, plates clinking, footsteps fading toward the living room. Normal sounds, ordinary. And yet, it felt like the house itself had turned colder. I looked at the old photograph on the wall, the one from our first family picnic. My kids were small, laughing, faces sticky with melted ice cream. Back then, they thought I could fix anything: a toy, a scraped knee, a bad day. Now I couldn't even fix what they thought of me. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples. Maybe this is how love changes, not in a burst, but in a slow, quiet drift. You give and give until what you give looks invisible. I opened the jar of coins and let a few slip through my fingers. They chimed softly, a sound both hollow and comforting. Then I whispered to no one in particular. "One day you'll see. One day you'll understand what this was for." In the distance, I heard Jake's laughter again, carefree, full of youth and ignorance. I smiled sadly. That was the sound of someone who hadn't yet carried the weight of responsibility, who didn't yet know that love sometimes hides behind sacrifice, and that the cheapest man in the room might just be the richest in heart. That night I didn't go back to the table. I sat there until the moonlight reached the jar of coins, and the metal caught the glow like tiny stars. I told myself a quiet truth I'd never said aloud. They think I'm saving money, but really I'm saving them. And for the first time in years, I felt tears not from regret, but from the strange, lonely beauty of loving more than you are understood. Morning always came early for me, not because I loved waking up before dawn, but because that's when silence still had value before the engine started, before the world began asking for more. I'd pour a small cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. The smell was sharp, almost bitter, the kind that wakes not the body but the conscience. Out in the driveway, the frost had settled over the windshield, soft as dust. My breath would cloud in the air while I scraped the glass clean, my fingers stiff, the metal scraper biting into my palm. Then the drive, 30 minutes of headlights and half-frozen radio static. At the garage, the air smelled of rubber, motor oil, and cold steel. The kind of smell that sticks to your clothes long after you've left, like proof that you've earned your living. It wasn't glamorous work. Fixing engines, rotating tires, changing brake pads, things that no one noticed until they broke. But I liked the rhythm of it. The hiss of the air compressor, the clang of a dropped wrench, the low hum of an engine finally running smooth again. Those sounds were my music. And each hour I worked, I could almost see it, a small number ticking up in the corner of my mind in that account no one else knew about, the college fund, the promise I'd made years ago, long before my kids were old enough to spell the word tuition. Sometimes I'd think about telling them, but then I'd picture their faces, how they'd roll their eyes, laugh, or call me old-fashioned again, so I kept it to myself. Love, I figured, didn't always need an audience. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the trade-offs. Every Christmas, when the families on our street hung up shimmering lights, I'd stand by the window, calculator in hand. Electricity bill, heating oil, mortgage, tuition, add, subtract, breathe, repeat. I'd tell my wife, let's keep it simple this year. She'd sigh, not angry, just tired of simplicity. So I'd promise her next year would be better, and I meant it every time. But better never came. Only steady, reliable, quiet. Once a coworker invited me to Las Vegas for a weekend trip. He said, "Come on, man, you work too hard, live a little." I smiled, told him I'd think about it. That night I put the same amount he spent on his trip into the college fund, $420. That number stayed with me. $420, one weekend of someone else's fun, one step closer to my children's future. When the kids were small, it was easier. They'd wave goodbye every morning, tiny hands smudged with peanut butter, shouting, "Bye, Daddy." They didn't care about money back then. A Happy Meal was a feast. A park swing was paradise. But as they grew, so did the distance. Teenagers don't wave. They ask for things, sneakers, phones, cars. Things that said we belong. I said no more often than they wanted to hear. And every no cost me something, not dollars, but closeness. Sometimes I'd find little clues of what I was missing. An invitation to a school concert left on the counter after it had already happened. A photograph on social media, my family smiling at a restaurant I hadn't been invited to. I'd look at the image and think, that's what it costs. That's the exchange rate for dreams. Still, I didn't complain, because every paycheck that came in meant another line added to the account. Month after month, I watched it grow. $12,000, then $25,000, and still I kept going, even when my back ached, even when my fingers cracked from the cold. At night, I'd come home after everyone had gone to bed. The house would be dim, quiet except for the refrigerator's hum. I'd sit in the kitchen, peel off my gloves, and count the calluses like a calendar, one for each month I'd pushed through. The smell of detergent from my uniform lingered in the air, mixed with a faint scent of lemon dish soap. It reminded me of home, not warm, not cold, just lived in. One winter, the heater broke. The repair estimate was $900. My wife said, "We should just replace the whole system, it's old anyway." I nodded, but inside I saw the college fund drop, the number rewinding like a cruel joke. So I went down to the basement that night with a flashlight and an old manual. The metal was freezing to the touch. My hands went numb by midnight. But when the system finally whirred to life, I smiled in the dark. 900 saved. Another piece of their future kept intact. That became my pattern, small victories no one noticed, packing lunch instead of eating out, repairing things instead of replacing them, saying no to comfort today so they could have choices tomorrow. It wasn't heroism, it was habit, a quiet discipline carved by years of wanting something better for people who didn't see it yet. On my birthday, the guys at the shop pitched in for a card. "Don't work too hard," one wrote. "You can't take it with you." I laughed politely, but the words stayed in my chest the rest of the day. He was right, you can't take it with you. But maybe if you're lucky, you can leave something behind. Something that changes the way your children live, even if they never understand how much it cost you. That night, as I slipped into bed beside my wife, the faint glow from the alarm clock painted her face in soft blue light. She was asleep, peaceful, unaware of the quiet math still running in my head: tuition, fees, housing, books. Outside, snow began to fall, thin flakes drifting against the window. The kind of snow that makes everything seem still, as if the world itself pauses to listen. And in that stillness, I whispered a small promise to no one but myself. Keep going, just a few more years. They'll thank you one day. Then I closed my eyes and let the hum of the heater fill the room, a sound that to me had always meant love. It started as a picture in my head. Not grand, not glossy like the brochures that would one day arrive in our mailbox. Just a simple image. My son, backpack slung over one shoulder, walking across a campus lined with trees. Autumn leaves drifting down. The kind of moment that meant arrival, not at a destination, but at possibility. That image carried me through more mornings than coffee ever could. The first time the idea of college came up, Jake was in middle school. He'd gotten on a science project, something about circuits and solar panels. He was glowing with pride. I could build real ones someday, he said, waving the little cardboard model in the air. I told him he could build anything if he worked for it. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and did something that felt almost ceremonial. I opened a new savings account. The screen flickered under the dim light. Beneficiary, Jake Miller. It didn't feel like much, just numbers in a bank system somewhere. But to me, it felt like the planting of a seed. The first deposit was small, $40, barely enough to cover a textbook, maybe half a week's groceries. Still, I remember the way the receipt felt in my hand, thin, ordinary paper, but warm from the printer, as if it were alive with promise. Every paycheck after that, I'd transfer a little more, sometimes 50, sometimes 100. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the direction. Years passed. Life filled up with the usual noise: birthdays, report cards, broken faucets, quiet arguments about bills. But through it all, that account stayed untouched. I never talked about it, not once. It was my secret vow, whispered between me and the future. When Jake entered high school, the dream started to look less like fantasy and more like logistics. There were meetings with counselors, pamphlets from universities, words like admissions and scholarships tossed around the dinner table. I sat mostly in silence, listening, taking notes on a yellow pad while the others talked. They spoke about which schools had the best programs, the best dorms, the best reputation. But in the corner of my mind, I only heard one word repeating itself: cost. Every figure they mentioned turned into a mental subtraction. I could almost feel the weight of it in my chest, like someone quietly pressing down on my ribs. One night I went online and looked up tuition rates. The numbers glared back at me, lines of digits, higher than I'd expected, higher than I'd hoped. For a long time I just stared at them. Then I took a deep breath and whispered to the glow of the screen, "All right, we'll find a way." That was the thing about promises: once you make them, you don't unmake them just because the math gets harder. By Jake's junior year, I'd memorized the names of colleges the way some men memorize baseball stats. Boston, Michigan, UCLA. Each one had its own column in a notebook I kept hidden under the driver's seat of my truck. At lunch breaks, while the younger guys at the shop scrolled through their phones, I'd jot down tuition numbers, housing estimates, and financial aid percentages. The pages smelled faintly of grease and ink, the scent of two worlds colliding. I never told anyone. Dreams, I'd learned, grow better in quiet soil. There was one evening I'll never forget. Jake came home late from school, shoulders slumped, his face pale under the kitchen light. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "I don't think we can afford college. It's just too much." He was 16, but in that moment he looked much younger, the same boy who used to sit on my shoulders at the county fair. I wanted to tell him the truth right then, that there was an account in his name, waiting, growing. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said, "Let me worry about that. You just keep your grades up." He frowned. "But you always say we have to be realistic." I met his eyes and tried to smile. "Sometimes," I said, "being realistic means planning so far ahead people don't even see it yet." He didn't understand, not fully, but he nodded. And when he walked away, I felt both proud and lonely, proud that he cared, lonely that he couldn't yet see the whole picture. Every so often, I'd print out the latest statement and fold it neatly into an envelope. Not to look at it, just to hold it, to remind myself it was real. Each page carried the faint smell of ink and the weight of progress. $32,000. That was the last number I remember seeing before things started to change, before the laughter at dinner, before the misunderstandings grew roots. But back then, the dream still felt alive. Some nights, when the house was quiet, I'd picture that first day all over again. Jake stepping into a lecture hall, notebooks under his arm, eyes full of curiosity. I'd imagine him calling home, telling us about his professors, the campus, his plans. And I'd imagine my wife's voice softening when she spoke of him. Your father made this possible. That was the dream. Not the diploma, not the prestige. Just that moment of understanding, the bridge between effort and appreciation. I knew I might never see that day. Life has a way of hiding its rewards behind corners you don't always live to turn. But still, every week I'd deposit something, no matter how small, because somewhere deep inside that image remained. A boy under autumn trees, walking into a future I'd built, step by quiet step, long before he ever knew it was waiting for him. It happened gradually, the way distance always does. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but through small silences that pile up like dust. One missed dinner, one distracted nod, one maybe later that turns into never. At first, I told myself it was just the season. Jake was older now, busier. He had friends, a part-time job, a world that didn't need my approval. My wife spent more time scrolling through her phone than talking to me. The house was still full of voices, but they no longer seemed to reach me. I'd come home from work, boots heavy with dirt, hands smelling faintly of grease and winter air. The living room lights glowed warm, the TV murmuring in the background. My family would be there together, laughing at something on a screen I didn't recognize. I'd stand in the doorway for a moment, waiting for an invitation that never came. Then I'd clear my throat, say a soft hey, and they'd look up, just long enough to acknowledge me. Dinner was usually reheated now, a plate left on the counter under plastic wrap, cooling by the minute. I'd eat standing up sometimes, listening to the sound of their laughter drifting from the other room. It wasn't that they were unkind, just elsewhere. On weekends, I'd suggest family outings. A drive to the lake maybe, or movie night at home. "Dad, I've got plans," Jake would say, eyes glued to his phone. My daughter would shrug, her earbuds already in. Even my wife, gentle but worn down, would sigh and say, "They're growing up, let them be. Growing up." I repeated that phrase often like a justification, a salve for something I didn't want to name. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unnecessary. It sits quietly beside you, even when the room is full. I felt it most in the evenings when the house buzzed with everyone's separate lives. Jake in his room laughing into a headset. My daughter singing along to music I couldn't name. My wife's fingers tapping on her laptop, blue light reflecting off her face. I'd sit at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, listening to the different sounds of isolation blending into a single hum. One night, I opened the hallway closet and found an old box of photo albums. Dust rose like soft smoke when I lifted the lid. Inside were frozen versions of us. Birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. In every picture, my hands were somewhere in the frame, steadying a bicycle, holding a toddler, lighting candles on a cake. Now, those same hands couldn't even hold a conversation without it slipping away. I traced one of the photos with my thumb, Jake, missing a front tooth, grinning as I held him up in the air. I could almost hear the echo of his laughter, that raw, unfiltered sound that children make when they still believe their fathers can do anything. The memory was sharp enough to sting. Money had become the language we spoke most fluently. Bills, repairs, expenses. It was practical, emotionless, and safe. But underneath it all, something was shifting, a quiet resentment that grew every time I said no. When Jake turned 17, he wanted a used car. I told him I couldn't afford it right now. He didn't yell, not at first. He just looked at me, really looked, as if measuring the kind of man I was. Then he said, "You can't afford anything, can you?" The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. I didn't answer. What could I say? That every dollar he wanted was already working for him in silence. That love sometimes wears the face of denial. Instead, I just nodded. And that nod, I think, said more than I meant it to. After that, something changed between us. He stopped asking for advice, stopped waiting for me to join the conversation. At dinner, he'd scroll through his phone, laugh at something his friend sent, and never look up. When I spoke, it was like trying to talk across a river. My words fell short before they reached the other side. Even my wife started to mirror the distance. She'd say, "You're too serious all the time," or "You worry too much." And maybe she was right, but what else was there to do but worry? Worrying was how I loved them, quietly, consistently, invisibly. One evening, I came home later than usual. Traffic had been brutal, rain falling in thick sheets that blurred the world into gray. When I stepped inside, the smell of takeout filled the house: sesame oil, fried noodles, soy sauce. They were all around the table, laughing, eating, chopsticks clinking against paper boxes. For a second, I thought maybe they'd waited for me. But there was no extra plate. Just a small note on the counter, written in my wife's quick, familiar handwriting. "Didn't think you'd be home for dinner. There's food left in the fridge." I stood there, coat dripping onto the tile, watching them from across the room. They didn't notice me at first. When Jake finally did, he lifted his hand in a half wave. "Hey, Dad," he said, mouth full, smile brief. Then he turned back to his phone. Something inside me tightened, not anger, not quite sadness, just resignation. I hung my jacket, warmed up the leftovers, and ate in the dim light while they laughed from the living room. The food tasted fine, but some flavor that used to make this house feel alive, had gone missing. That night I lay awake listening to the rain against the window. It tapped softly, rhythmically, like an old habit that refuses to stop. I thought about the years behind me, all the saving, all the planning, all the invisible labor that no one had ever asked for but everyone would someday benefit from. And as I stared at the dark ceiling, I realized something bitter and undeniable. My family hadn't become cruel. They'd just forgotten the man who had once been their center, forgotten the quiet, unseen work that kept their world steady. And the cruelest part wasn't their forgetting. It was knowing I'd made it too easy for them to forget. It was a Saturday in late spring, the kind of day that smelled of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke drifting from neighbors' yards. Jake's 21st birthday. The house had been busy since morning. Balloons taped to the walls, music pulsing from a speaker, the faint sweetness of frosting hanging in the air. I watched from the kitchen doorway as my wife arranged cupcakes on a tray. Her movements were practiced, brisk, efficient, a rhythm I used to know well but hadn't danced to in a long time. Friends of Jake's were arriving, loud and easy, tossing jokes through the air like confetti. I stood quietly in the corner, invisible in plain sight, the way fathers sometimes are when their usefulness has run out. When Jake came down the stairs, everyone cheered. He had that effortless grin, the one that reminded me of his mother in our younger years. He hugged her first, then his sister. When he reached me, he patted my shoulder and said, "Hey, Dad," before moving on. It was a small gesture, but it landed heavier than he knew. The afternoon wore on with laughter and noise, the smell of grilled meat, the clinking of soda cans. I tried to stay out of the way, busying myself by straightening things that didn't need straightening, a plate here, a napkin there. Every so often, someone would ask me to take a photo, and I would smile dutifully, holding the camera steady while everyone else leaned into each other. The sun dipped lower. Someone dimmed the lights. A cake appeared, candles flickering like tiny hearts. Everyone sang, a little off-key, full of life. Jake blew out the candles, made a wish, and everyone clapped. Then came the gifts. They piled around him on the couch, boxes and bags in bright paper, ribbons undone by impatient fingers. He laughed at a new watch, thanked his girlfriend for a hoodie, smiled at his mother's card. Finally, his sister handed him a small brown box. "This one's from all of us," she said, grinning, "including Dad." I frowned slightly. I hadn't known about a group gift. But before I could ask, Jake tore the wrapping off and opened the box. Inside was a wallet, a cheap faux leather wallet, the kind you find on clearance at a gas station. Someone had scrawled on the box lid in black marker, "So you can save more money just like Dad." For a moment I didn't understand. Then the laughter started. It began as a chuckle from one of his friends, then spread, a ripple of amusement filling the room. Jake held the wallet up for everyone to see. "Perfect," he said, grinning. "Now I can be just like you, Dad, counting every penny." The laughter grew louder. Someone whistled. Someone else said, "Careful, Jake, your dad might make you pay him back for it." I stood frozen, my hand still resting on the edge of the counter. I tried to smile, but my throat felt tight, the air heavy with something sour and familiar, that quiet humiliation that comes from being misunderstood by people you love. My wife gave a small, uneasy laugh. I told them it was a bad idea, she said lightly, glancing at me but not quite meeting my eyes. The music started up again. People moved on, but I couldn't. The noise around me blurred as if someone had turned the world's volume down to a low, distant hum. I watched my son tuck the wallet into his back pocket, still smiling, still surrounded by friends. For him, it was a harmless joke. For me, it was the moment I realized how completely I had failed to make them see me. I excused myself quietly. No one noticed. In the hallway, the laughter faded behind me, replaced by the creak of floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. The air smelled faintly of sugar and burnt candles. In the bathroom mirror, I caught my reflection, older than I remembered, tired in places I didn't know could ache. I ran cold water over my hands, the shock of it waking something raw beneath my ribs. How strange, I thought, that you can spend your whole life giving, and still be known only for what you refuse to spend. I walked back into the kitchen. The table was covered with empty cups, crumpled napkins, a half-eaten cake. I picked up the knife, sliced off a small piece, and sat down at the far end of the table. The cake was too sweet. The frosting clung to the roof of my mouth. Somewhere in the other room, Jake was telling a story, everyone laughing again. His voice carried through the walls, confident, young, full of a future he didn't yet realize was being built from my yesterdays. After the guests left, the house fell quiet. My wife was upstairs cleaning, my daughter on the phone. Jake stepped into the kitchen, his hair messy, cheeks still flushed from celebration. "Hey," he said, seeing me. "Thanks for helping out today, it was great." I nodded, glad you enjoyed it. He leaned against the counter, still holding that wallet. "Pretty funny, huh?" he said, grinning. "I mean, you know it's just a joke, right?" I wanted to answer, to explain what that joke had cost me, how every dollar I saved was another piece of their future, how every no I'd ever said had been a disguised form of love. But I didn't. I just smiled, small and tired. "Yeah," I said, "pretty funny." He clapped me on the shoulder, thanked me again, and went upstairs. I listened to his footsteps fade away, the house slowly returning to stillness. I sat there for a long time, staring at the leftover cake, the deflated balloons, the faint ring of laughter still echoing in the walls. Then I reached for my wallet, old, worn, edges fraying, and ran my thumb along its spine. Inside was a folded receipt from years ago, one I'd never thrown away. The first deposit slip for his college fund. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases, letting my fingers rest on the faded ink. And somewhere in the quiet, the decision came. Calm, heavy, final. If they could only see value through money, then maybe money was the only language left for me to speak. That night I made up my mind. The morning after Jake's birthday, the house still smelled faintly of frosting and burnt candles. The balloons were sagging, the floor sticky in spots where someone had spilled soda. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, revealing the quiet aftermath of celebration, that strange stillness that follows laughter when it leaves a place too soon. I stood by the sink, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. The wallet joke kept replaying in my head, looping in a rhythm I couldn't shut off. Every detail of it, the laughter, the tone, the look on his face, seemed to echo louder than the party itself. Some wounds don't bleed. They hum beneath the surface, steady and invisible, like a heartbeat you can't quiet. By noon, I'd made up my mind. There were no fireworks in the decision, no anger left to ignite it, just a simple clarity that comes when disappointment hardens into resolve. I grabbed my old jacket from the hook and stepped outside. The air was cool, sharp, with the scent of rain-soaked pavement. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own footsteps too clearly. As I walked toward the car, I noticed the reflection of the house in the side window. For a brief second, I saw it the way strangers might. Warm, well-kept, unremarkable. From the outside, everything looked fine. Only the inside had gone hollow. The drive to the bank took 20 minutes. I kept the radio off. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the wipers filled the silence. It was the kind of gray morning where the clouds hang low as if they are listening. At the bank, the air smelled of carpet cleaner and printer ink, sterile, efficient. A woman at the front desk greeted me with a professional smile. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. What can we do for you today?" Her badge said Evelyn, looked young enough to be my daughter, polite, bright-eyed, unaware she was about to witness something that had taken me a lifetime to build. "I'd like to move some money," I said quietly, "from my savings to a trust account." She nodded, guiding me toward her desk. "Of course, may I ask what kind of trust?" "For education," I said. "For my children." Her fingers clicked across the keyboard, the sound sharp and precise. "How much would you like to transfer?" I hesitated for a second. "All of it," I said. Her typing stopped. She looked up, surprised. "All of it?" "Yes," I said. "Every cent." While she processed the request, I glanced around the room, rows of chairs, a fake plant in the corner, a framed poster about financial planning, ordinary things. But to me this was a kind of ceremony, the quiet signing away of years no one had thanked me for. Evelyn handed me a form, my name at the top, blank lines waiting for signatures at the bottom. As I filled it out, my hand trembled slightly. The pen left faint grooves on the paper, pressure marks like small scars. When I was done, she smiled again. "It's all set up, Mr. Miller. The funds will be transferred today. Would you like to name yourself as the primary trustee?" I shook my head. "No, make it direct. It goes to them when they enroll in college, no exceptions." She hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want to retain access?" I looked her in the eye. "No," I said. "Some things you have to let go of completely to mean what they're supposed to mean." When I stepped back outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. The air smelled of wet asphalt and early spring, a mix of endings and beginnings. I stood there for a while, watching cars pass, each one filled with people on their way somewhere that mattered to them. I thought about the years that had brought me here, every lunch skipped, every old jacket worn a year too long, every quiet sacrifice folded into this one moment. It felt strange, almost peaceful. Not victory, not sadness, just completion. I drove home with the window slightly open, the wind cool against my face. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. At home, the house was empty. My wife was out shopping. Jake's car was gone, no doubt off with friends, maybe even showing them the new wallet. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had once been covered in birthday cake and laughter. Now it held only a single envelope, the document from the bank. I unfolded it carefully, reading each line, each clause. The numbers stared back, years of work reduced to black ink on white paper. And yet to me they were more than that. They were weekends missed, calluses earned, a lifetime translated into tuition and opportunity. As I folded the papers back into the envelope, I noticed the faint scent of ink, clean, almost metallic. The sound of the paper sliding against itself was soft, final, a sound you could almost mistake for closure. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my old wallet and opened it. Inside was the receipt from that very first deposit, yellowed at the edges. I slipped it into the envelope, a bridge between the beginning and the end. Then I sealed it shut. When my wife came home later, she asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. I told her I was tired. She shrugged, grabbed her purse and left again, her perfume lingering briefly in the doorway before it faded into the air. I sat in the quiet that followed, the envelope resting under my hand. Outside, the light dimmed slowly, brushing the walls with gold before it surrendered to gray. Somewhere deep in the house, the refrigerator hummed, steady as breath. And for a moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, love didn't need to be seen to be real. It only needed to be kept. Safely, silently, in places no one ever thought to look. The argument began the way most arguments do, with something small, a simple request, a conversation that should have been harmless. Jake walked into the kitchen one afternoon, keys jingling in his hand, that restless energy of youth crackling around him. He was taller than me now, broader, confident in a way I never was at his age. He smelled faintly of cologne and gasoline, the scent of a boy on the edge of adulthood, half man, half dream. "Dad," he said, leaning against the counter, "I found a car. It's used but in great shape, only needs a few fixes." I looked up from the bills I was sorting. He was excited, that much was clear. His eyes were alive, the way they used to be when he was 10 and wanted to build tree houses. "How much?" I asked. "3,000. The guy said he'd hold it if we can pay this week." The words "we" and "pay" hit me in the chest before I could answer. I felt the familiar tightening, the quiet math I'd learned to do behind my smile. "Jake," I said gently, "I can't right now. Things are tight." He frowned, leaning back. "Come on, Dad, you just got your tax refund. You said work's been good." That money spoken for, I said. For what? I hesitated. The truth sat heavy on my tongue for you, for your future, for a promise you don't even know I've kept. But I couldn't say it, not yet. It's just not for this, I managed. He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. Not for this, Dad, I need a car. Everyone else I know drives. I can't keep borrowing Mom's. I understand, I said, keeping my tone calm, but a car is a want, not a need. He laughed under his breath, a sharp, bitter sound. That's exactly what I expected you to say. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that hums just before it breaks. He paced the kitchen, sneakers squeaking against the tile. I could hear the frustration building in his breath, fast and uneven. You know what, Dad? He said finally, turning to face me. You don't care about what I need, you never have, you care about money. I blinked, the words landed like stones. That's not true, I said quietly. Really, every time I ask for something you say we can't afford it. Every time Mom wants to fix the house you say no. You hoard money like it's oxygen. For what? You can't take it with you when you die. His voice cracked on the last word, half anger, half plea. I wanted to tell him the truth, that every saved dollar had his name written on it, that my sacrifices were love in a language he hadn't yet learned to read. But pride, or maybe exhaustion, kept me still. I'm doing what I can for this family, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He shook his head. No, you're doing what you think is right. You never listen. You just hide behind your rules and your stupid thrift. He turned away, his shoulders stiff, fists clenched. I could see the boy he used to be, the one who once reached for my hand crossing the street, fading into the man who now refused to look at me. Something inside me ached, deep and unnameable. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the space between us, but my body wouldn't move. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said softly. He spun back, eyes bright with frustration. Don't do that, don't say things like that. It's like talking to a wall. You don't even try to understand me. Jake, no, he interrupted, voice rising. You care more about saving than living. You think money fixes everything, but it's killing us, Dad. It's killing this family. The room seemed to shrink around us. The afternoon light cut through the blinds, painting narrow stripes across his face, half in shadow, half in fire. His breathing was ragged. Mine wasn't much better. And then quieter, almost trembling, he said, I used to think you worked hard for us. Now I think you just don't know how to stop working for yourself. That one cut deeper than the rest. For a moment I couldn't speak. The air felt heavy in my throat. Then finally I whispered, You'll understand one day. He laughed, a cold, disbelieving sound, and shook his head. I doubt it. He left the room, footsteps hard on the floor. The front door slammed, rattling the picture frames on the wall. Then silence, vast and absolute. I stood there, my hands still resting on the table, staring at the half-open folder of bills. The ink on the numbers blurred as my eyes burned. Outside, I heard the fading roar of an engine, his friend's car picking him up, carrying him somewhere I no longer belonged. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time after that. The smell of dust and lemon cleaner hung in the air. Somewhere upstairs, the refrigerator clicked on, humming low, the same sound that had filled countless quiet nights before. My wife came home later and asked, What happened? I told her nothing, because how do you explain a fracture you helped create by loving too quietly? How do you tell someone that your son, the boy you once carried on your shoulders, now looks at you and sees an obstacle? That night I went to bed but didn't sleep. I listened to the clock ticking in the dark, steady and cruel. Each second was a reminder of time lost, of words unsaid, of love misunderstood. I thought of the account I'd opened, of the money waiting in silence for a future he no longer trusted me to care about. And I wondered, for the first time, if the thing I'd built to protect him had somehow built the wall now standing between us. In the darkness, I whispered a truth he wasn't there to hear. I wasn't saving money, Jake. I was saving you. And the quiet that followed sounded a lot like loss. The house felt different after that argument, not immediately, but in the slow, creeping way a season changes. No one announced the shift. It just arrived, quiet and certain, and settled into the corners like a chill you can't quite shake. Jake stopped coming home for dinner. At first, he said it was because of work, then because of friends, then because he just needed space. Each excuse sounded rehearsed, polite, and final. My wife didn't press him, and I learned not to ask. I'd hear his car pull in late at night, the low thud of footsteps up the stairs, a door closing softly. No greetings, no good nights, just the rhythm of distance growing steadier with every day. In the mornings, my wife and I moved around the kitchen like two people renting the same silence. She poured coffee, I packed my lunch. Our words were few, clipped, transactional. Do you need anything from the store? No, we're fine. Fine, the most dishonest word in any marriage. She'd started looking at me differently, as though the argument with Jake had confirmed something she'd suspected but never said aloud. That maybe I was the problem. That maybe, in my effort to protect, I had made everything too hard to love. One evening I came home from work and found them all at the dining table. Take-out boxes, laughter, the glow of warm light. It was almost domestic, almost. When I stepped into the room, the conversation died, as if someone had hit a mute button. Jake glanced up, then down again. My daughter poked at her noodles, pretending not to notice. My wife cleared her throat. We didn't know what time you'd be back, she said. Her tone was even practiced, an apology without softness. It's fine, I said, setting my keys on the counter. Long day. No one replied. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the far end of the table. The clatter of chopsticks filled the silence, small, deliberate noises that replaced words none of us wanted to say. The smell of sesame oil and soy sauce hung in the air. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a barrier. After dinner, Jake went upstairs without a word. My wife gathered plates, her movements precise and fast, as if she couldn't get the cleanup done quickly enough. I tried to help. She stopped me. I've got it, she said. Her back was turned to me, shoulders tense. The overhead light reflected off the kitchen tiles, bright and unforgiving. Do you think, she said finally, her voice quiet but tight, that maybe you could try being a little less strict? Strict? With Jake, she said, turning slightly. He's not a child anymore. Maybe it's time to trust him. I do trust him, I said, but trust doesn't mean saying yes to everything. She let out a tired sigh. You make everything sound like a battle. I didn't answer, because in that moment I wasn't sure she was wrong. The next few weeks moved in fragments, polite mornings, empty evenings, a house full of people who had stopped being a family. I worked longer hours, not for the money, but for the quiet. At least at the garage, noise made sense. Engines roared, tools clanged, problems were solved one bolt at a time. Home was different. At home, problems just lingered. Sometimes I'd come back to find the living room glowing with the blue light of a television I wasn't invited to watch. They'd be there together, my wife, Jake, my daughter, their laughter filling the air. And though the sound should have made me happy, it only deepened the hollow inside my chest. I'd stand in the doorway unseen for a few seconds before slipping upstairs. My footsteps had learned to make no sound. One night I overheard them talking. I hadn't meant to. I was just walking past the living room when my name surfaced in the murmur. He doesn't get it, Jake was saying. He's always been like this, afraid to enjoy life. He's not afraid, my wife replied, though her tone lacked conviction. He just thinks differently. Yeah, well, Jake muttered, it's suffocating. Silence. Then the faint scrape of a fork against a plate. He's trying, she said softly. Trying what? Jake said. To make us miserable. They both laughed, not cruelly but carelessly, and that hurt more than anything. I stood there, half-shadowed in the hallway, the carpet cool under my feet. The house smelled faintly of detergent and lemon cleaner, clean and impersonal, like a place waiting for someone else to move. For a long time, I just listened to their voices fading into ordinary conversation, then turned away. Upstairs, my room felt too neat, too quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint outline of the envelope on my nightstand, the papers from the bank sealed and untouched. It had been weeks since I'd created that account. Weeks of distance, resentment, misunderstanding. The very thing I'd built to give them freedom had somehow built a wall between us. Lying there in the dim light, I realized something cruelly simple. I had made love invisible, and people forget what they can't see. The air in the room felt thin, the kind that makes your chest ache when you breathe too deeply. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Through the window, the faint orange glow of the street lamp spilled across the yard. I thought of Jake, his words, his laughter, his easy rejection. And I thought of my wife standing between us, too tired to choose a side. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time this house had felt warm. The memory wouldn't come. Sometime after midnight, I rose and walked to the window. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips. Far off, I could hear a dog barking, the low rumble of a passing car, the whisper of wind through the trees. Ordinary sounds of life carrying on without me. And in that moment, surrounded by my own quiet house, I understood that a family doesn't always break with noise. Sometimes it freezes, slowly, completely, until the warmth you once built your life around turns into something you can't feel anymore. Only remember, it was a Thursday evening when I finally decided to write it. The house was quiet, that heavy, uneasy kind of quiet that hums under your skin. Upstairs, a door shut softly. A muffled laugh from a video echoed through the walls. I sat at the kitchen table, under the weak yellow glow of the hanging light, a blank sheet of paper before me. The page looked too white, too clean, untouched in the way hope sometimes is, waiting for someone brave enough to stain it. I turned the pen in my hand, feeling the weight of it. It had been years since I'd written anything longer than a grocery list or a check. But some things can't be said out loud. They have to live quietly, folded between pages, waiting for the right eyes to find them. The first words came slowly, not elegant, not rehearsed, just honest. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't find the right time to tell you these things in person. I paused. The sound of the refrigerator's soft hum filled the space. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and rain. There had been a storm earlier and the dampness still clung to the windows. I wrote again. I know what you think of me, that I'm stubborn, that I care too much about money, that I've made your lives smaller than they could have been. My hand trembled slightly, the pen scratching uneven lines into the paper. You're not wrong, not about all of it. I've said no too many times. I've made rules I couldn't always explain, but every no was meant to build a yes I hoped you'd have someday. The words began to come faster after that, like water from a cracked pipe. Years of silence finally given shape. I started saving before Jake turned 13. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted it to be a gift, not a burden. I wanted you to live your lives without the shadow of sacrifice hanging over you. I looked up, my vision swimming. The shadows on the wall seemed to move with the flicker of the light bulb. Somewhere upstairs, a chair scraped against the floor. The account is in your names. It's meant for education, for a beginning, not an end. Use it for college or to start something that lasts, but please don't waste it on things that fade. I stopped to breathe. My chest felt tight. The pen tip left a small blot of ink where it rested too long. The letter had begun as a simple instruction, a practical thing, a guide for when I wasn't around. But now it was something else. It was confession. It was apology. It was love translated into ink and paper because my voice had forgotten how to say it. You may never understand why I did things the way I did. That's all right. Understanding comes slower than forgiveness, and both take time. Just know this. Nothing I did was out of pride or control. It was out of fear, the kind that keeps you awake at night, wondering if your children will have what you didn't. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. Behind my eyelids, I saw flashes: Jake's first day of school, my daughter's laugh, the way my wife once looked at me like I was her anchor. All the things I'd worked to protect, now slipping further away no matter how tightly I held on. I took a sip of cold coffee and read the letter again. The words weren't perfect, but they were mine. Every sentence carried a piece of me I hadn't shared in years. I added one more line, the one that mattered most. If you ever doubt what I felt for you, look at what I left, not what I withheld. The ink glistened wet for a second, then sank into the paper, dark and final. I folded the pages carefully, smoothing each crease. The paper was still warm from my hand. I found an old envelope in the drawer, cream-colored, slightly torn at the edge. On the front, I wrote in slow, deliberate strokes, "For my children when the time is right." I sealed it, pressing the flap closed with the side of my thumb. The faint glue tasted bitter when it caught the air. Then I opened the drawer beneath the sink and pulled out a small tin box, the same one where I used to keep receipts and spare keys. Inside were a few folded bank papers, the trust account details, a brief memo for the bank in case I couldn't deliver this myself. And now this letter. I slid it in gently, the sound of paper against metal crisp and quiet. For a moment I just stared at the closed box. It wasn't much, certainly not the kind of legacy people write about, but it was all I had. Years of labor condensed into savings and sentences. Proof that even a life built on silence can still leave something that speaks. The rain started again, soft at first, tapping against the kitchen window. Each drop caught the light, streaking the glass like threads of silver. The sound was steady, almost rhythmic, a reminder that life continues even when no one listens. I sat there watching it fall, feeling the heaviness inside me ease just a little. Not peace exactly, but a kind of acceptance, the quiet understanding that some things can't be fixed, only witnessed. Upstairs, I heard Jake laugh, that familiar, careless sound of youth. It didn't sting this time. If anything, it grounded me. I whispered into the still air, "One day you'll find it. And when you do, I hope you see me not as the man who said no, but as the one who never stopped saying yes, just in a different way." Then I turned off the light, and the kitchen slipped into darkness, leaving only the soft glow of the rain and the faint comfort of something finally written down. The first sign was small, a tremor in my hand that I blamed on too much coffee. It happened while tightening a bolt at the garage. The wrench slipped, clanging against the floor, startling the young apprentice next to me. "You okay, Mr. Miller?" he asked. I laughed it off. "Just getting old," I said. But the truth was, I'd been feeling it for weeks, the shortness of breath, the pounding in my chest when I climbed the stairs, the way my vision flickered at the edges when I bent too fast. I told myself it was nothing. There was always work to finish, oil to change, bills to pay. Rest was a luxury I'd never learned how to afford. That Friday the sky hung low and heavy, a dull gray pressing against the horizon. The smell of rain mixed with gasoline drifted through the open garage doors. It had been a long day, too many cars, too few hands. By the time the last customer left, my arms felt like lead. I sat down on a crate, rubbed my chest, and tried to breathe through the tightness. It wasn't pain exactly, just pressure, a weight that seemed to grow from the inside out. I could hear the faint rattle of tools in the background, the sound of laughter from the younger mechanics, the slam of the rolling door being pulled shut. Their voices faded into the distance. The world began to tilt. When I came to, I was on the cold concrete floor, staring up at a ceiling I didn't recognize. White, too bright. The rhythmic beeping told me where I was before my eyes focused. A hospital. My chest was banded in wires and plastic tubes. The air smelled sterile, a mix of disinfectant and something faintly metallic. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain caught my ribs. A nurse appeared beside me, calm but firm. "Don't move too fast, Mr. Miller. You had a cardiac episode. You're stable now." Cardiac episode. The words hung in the air like smoke. Later that evening, a doctor came in, kind eyes, clipped sentences. "You've been under significant stress," he said. "Your heart's been asking for help for a while." He showed me charts, numbers, scans. They all meant the same thing: I'd been running on borrowed time. "You need to slow down," he said. "Take care of yourself. Find what makes your life lighter." I almost laughed. Lighter. My whole life had been about carrying things, responsibility, regret, silence. I didn't know how to set any of it down. My wife arrived the next morning. She looked tired, her hair pulled back hastily, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me, she froze in the doorway, relief and anger wrestling across her face. "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered. "I didn't want to worry you," I said. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just sat beside the bed, fingers folded in her lap, staring at the floor. "You always do that," she said softly. "You hide everything until it breaks." There wasn't much I could say. She wasn't wrong. Jake didn't come that day. Neither did my daughter. The nurse asked if I wanted her to call them, but I shook my head. It was better this way. I didn't want their concern born out of guilt. That night when the ward grew quiet, I lay awake listening to the low hum of machines. The fluorescent light above me buzzed faintly, the kind of noise that gets inside your head until you can't tell if it's real. I thought about the letter, the one I'd hidden weeks ago. It was safe, tucked away in the tin box under the sink beside the bank documents. If anything happened, someone would find it. That gave me a strange kind of peace. A nurse came in around midnight to check my vitals. She was young, maybe Jake's age. She smiled, adjusting the monitor. "You've got a strong heart, Mr. Miller. It just needs a little help remembering it's not indestructible." Her words lingered after she left. Not indestructible. It was strange, realizing that I had spent decades protecting others from weakness, only to be undone by my own. The next morning I woke to the sound of quiet footsteps. Jake was standing at the foot of my bed, hands in his pockets, eyes red-rimmed. He looked older somehow. Guilt has a way of doing that. "Mom told me," he said. I nodded. "I'm fine." He frowned. "You don't look fine." I wanted to tell him the truth, to use this moment to bridge the distance between us. But honesty felt heavier than the oxygen tube in my nose. Instead, I said, "Just tired." He pulled up a chair, sat down, and stared at the floor. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I didn't mean what I said before about you caring more about money than us." I closed my eyes. "I know. You've just always been hard to read." "I suppose I learned to be," I said. "The world doesn't give much to men who show too much." He looked up at me then, really looked, as if seeing past the armor for the first time. The air between us felt fragile, breakable, but real. When he left, he said, "Get better, okay?" I smiled faintly. "I'll try." After he was gone, I lay there watching the light shift across the room, slow and deliberate. The beeping of the monitor matched the rhythm of my thoughts, uneven but alive. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine stopping. Not giving up, but resting, just long enough to feel what it's like to exist without carrying everyone else. The room smelled of antiseptic and rain. Outside, a streak of sunlight broke through the clouds and landed across my hands. They looked older in that light, worn, scarred, trembling slightly, but still capable. I turned them palm up and whispered into the sterile air, "Not yet." Then I closed my eyes and let the hum of machines keep time, with a heart still learning how to forgive itself for breaking. It was a gray morning when the call came. The kind of morning that feels neither alive nor dead, just paused. Light pressed weakly through the kitchen curtains. The smell of burnt toast hung in the air. Tom's wife was rinsing a coffee cup when the phone rang. A landline, the one that never rang anymore except for wrong numbers and reminders. She almost didn't answer. "Hello." Her tone was flat, polite. Then it changed, a small hesitation, the kind that comes when a stranger says your name too formally. "Yes, this is Mrs. Miller." A pause. Her fingers tightened around the counter's edge. "I'm sorry, what account?" Tom was gone by then. A week earlier, the heart that had carried too much for too long had finally stopped trying to keep up. There were no grand last words, no cinematic fade. Just a quiet end, the kind he would have chosen, simple, private, unannounced. Jake and his sister had handled the arrangements with the detached precision of people too young to understand finality. Their mother moved through the days like someone underwater, slow and deliberate, unsure which way was up. The house was filled with flowers that didn't smell like comfort. Friends came, said kind things, then left. And in the days after, silence settled back into every room, the kind that doesn't just happen but stays. Now, as the voice on the other end of the line spoke, Mrs. Miller listened, brow furrowing. "Yes, yes, that's my husband's name," she said softly. "No, I wasn't aware of that account." The woman from the bank, calm, professional, explained everything. A trust fund, opened years ago, recently updated with a short handwritten memo attached. The words seemed to move through her like cold water. I don't understand," she murmured. "There must be a mistake." The woman's voice was gentle. "There's no mistake, ma'am. It's in your children's names. It's—" She hesitated, searching for the right phrasing, substantial. The receiver trembled in her hand. She glanced toward the dining room where the framed photo from Jake's 21st birthday still sat, balloons, laughter, and Tom in the corner of the picture, smiling awkwardly. Her voice wavered. "How much are we talking about?" When the woman told her, she almost dropped the phone. $180,000. Every dollar he'd ever refused to spend. Every joke, every argument, every cheap remark, it all gathered into that single, impossible number. That evening she told the children. Jake was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone when she spoke. His sister looked up first. "The bank called today," their mother said quietly. "It was about your father." Jake froze, waiting. "They said he had another account, a trust. It's in both of your names." "What kind of account?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "A college fund." Jake laughed, sharp, confused. "That can't be right. He didn't even want to help me buy a used car." His mother looked down, shaking her head. "It's true. The bank verified everything. He left a note with it." The room went still. No one spoke for a long moment. Outside, the evening wind rustled the trees, scattering the sound of dry leaves against the siding. Jake reached across the table, voice unsteady. "What did it say?" She hesitated, pulling a folded envelope from her pocket. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and something familiar, oil, maybe, or time. She began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't find the right time to tell you these things in person." Her voice cracked on the third line. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wet. Jake took the note gently from her hands. He read in silence, his lips moving slightly with each word. By the time he reached the final sentence, "Look at what I left, not what I withheld," the paper was shaking between his fingers. No one spoke after that. His sister got up first, walked to the window, and stood there staring out at the dark yard. Jake stayed seated, eyes on the note. He kept reading the same line over and over as if repetition could make it hurt less. His mother watched him, her face softening. "He never told me," she said, barely above a whisper. "All those years he just carried it alone." Jake folded the note carefully, pressing out the creases. "He wasn't cheap," he said quietly. "He was saving us." The words hung in the air, fragile, reverent. Later that night, Jake went into the garage. The smell of oil and metal still lingered, though the tools were untouched now, neatly arranged in the old wooden drawers. He ran his fingers over the workbench, the rough grain of it catching his skin. Dust shimmered in the single beam of light from the bare bulb above. In the corner, he found an old coffee can half filled with coins, quarters, dimes, pennies. He poured them into his palm, the sound like small echoes of a life measured in effort. He closed his hand around them, the metal cold against his skin. When he came back inside, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, the note in front of her, folded neatly. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that the note hadn't already said better. The house felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just honest. Every silence between them now carried meaning instead of blame. Jake looked at the note once more before whispering. "He was saving for our future, and we spent his love like it was endless." His mother reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Outside, the wind had stopped, and for the first time in a long while, the house was completely still, as if it were listening to the sound of understanding finally arriving. The morning of the funeral was cold, even though it was early spring. The kind of cold that crept through fabric and into bone, the kind that didn't come from weather but from absence. The church was small, white paint chipping near the windows, a cross that leaned slightly to one side as if tired of standing. Inside, the air smelled of wax and flowers, heavy and sweet. Too many lilies. Someone once told me lilies were for purity, but here they only seemed to carry the scent of endings. Jake stood near the front pew, still and pale, his suit a size too large, borrowed from a friend. His sister sat beside him, twisting a tissue between her fingers until it tore. Their mother was in the front row, her eyes red, her face drawn tight as though holding herself together by will alone. Every sound echoed, the scrape of a shoe, the cough of an old man, the creak of wooden benches. Outside, the wind whispered against the stained glass, scattering fragments of colored light across the casket. The pastor spoke first, kind words, practiced ones. He talked about duty, about quiet strength, about the small lives that hold up the larger ones without ever asking for thanks. People nodded, some wiped their eyes. But the words didn't feel like him, they were too tidy, too polished. Then came the moment the pastor stepped back and said, "If anyone would like to share a few words." For a while, no one moved. Only the rustle of paper programs and the faint hum of an old ceiling fan filled the silence. Then a man stood up near the back. Gray hair, grease-stained hands that didn't fit the suit he was wearing. It was Mark, one of the mechanics from the garage. He cleared his throat, glanced once at the casket, and said quietly, "I worked with Tom for almost 15 years. His voice cracked a little on the name. He talked about the early mornings, how Tom was always the first one in, always the last one out. How he never complained, not once, even when the shop heater broke in winter and everyone else cursed the cold. He wasn't just working for himself," Mark said. "We all knew that. He'd skip lunch sometimes, said he was cutting back, but I saw him take that money and walk straight to the bank on Fridays." A murmur spread through the room. Jake's head lifted slightly. Mark went on, slower now. "I asked him about it once, told him he was crazy to save that much. He just smiled and said, 'It's not for me.'" He paused, eyes glistening. "He said a good father builds something that outlasts his own hands. I didn't really get it then, but I do now." A low sound rippled through the pews, the quiet sob of understanding arriving too late. Jake felt his throat tighten. He remembered that smile, the one he'd thought meant stubbornness. Now he saw it for what it was, love disguised as endurance. Mark wiped at his eyes and took a step back, his voice softer now. "I don't know much about heaven," he said, "but if there's a place where work still matters, I'm sure he's already fixing something up there." The faint laughter that followed was wet with tears. After him, others stood, one by one. A neighbor who said he'd once found Tom shoveling her driveway at dawn. A man from the local diner who said Tom always tipped more than his meal was worth. A retired teacher who remembered how Tom fixed her car for free after hearing she lived on her pension. Each story landed like a gentle blow, a reminder of how much they hadn't known. The picture that formed wasn't the one they'd lived with, but the one he'd carried alone. When the pastor finally nodded toward the family, Jake rose. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His hands were trembling. His voice came out thin, unsure. "I thought my father cared more about money than people," he said. He stopped, swallowed hard. "I was wrong." He looked at the casket, the simple wood, the folded flag. He wasn't cheap. He was generous in ways we didn't see. He gave everything, not because he wanted praise, but because he believed love should outlast the body. A tear slipped down his cheek, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. He once told someone, I know now, that a good father builds something that outlasts his hands. Well, he did. He built us. His voice broke on the last word. He pressed a palm against the smooth edge of the casket as if trying to feel warmth through the wood. After the service, people filed past offering condolences, soft words, firm handshakes, awkward silences. The sunlight had turned harsh by then, reflecting off the polished lid like a mirror no one wanted to look into. Outside, as the casket was lowered into the ground, the pastor spoke again, his voice carried by the wind. Dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Jake knelt beside the grave, fingers pressing into the damp soil. He whispered something no one else could hear. His mother stood behind him, the letter from the bank folded in her coat pocket, its paper worn from being held too many times. She looked down at the grave, her voice trembling as she said under her breath, "You kept every promise, Tom, every single one." As the crowd dispersed, Jake remained still. The wind brushed through the trees, stirring the scent of grass and earth. He could almost hear it, the soft rattle of coins in a jar, the hum of an engine, his father's steady voice saying, "One day you'll understand." And for the first time he did. He stayed there until the workers came to fill the grave, until the last handful of soil fell like rain against the coffin lid. The sound was dull, final, yet in it Jake heard something unexpected. Not an ending, but the echo of a man who had loved so quietly, the world almost missed it. The morning after the funeral, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The air was thick with the scent of flowers beginning to wilt, their sweetness turning heavy and sour. Sunlight filtered through the half-closed blinds, thin and cold, slicing across the framed photographs that lined the hallway. Jake woke before anyone else. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the casket lowering, the sound of earth hitting wood echoing through his chest. He wandered downstairs barefoot, the floor cool against his skin, following the faint hum of the refrigerator, the same sound that had filled so many quiet dinners. The kitchen looked almost untouched since that night. The table was bare except for the folded memo from the bank and a small stack of envelopes his mother had gathered after the service. One of them was different, older, its edges soft and discolored, sealed with a single piece of clear tape instead of glue. On the front, written in his father's handwriting, were the words, "For when I'm gone." His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. He glanced toward the stairs. The house was still. His mother and sister were asleep. He hesitated, then sat down at the table, the envelope resting between his palms like something alive. He peeled the tape back carefully, unfolding the paper inside. The handwriting was steady but worn, letters pressed deep into the page, as if every word had weight. It began simply, "If you're reading this, it means I finally ran out of time." Jake swallowed hard. The words blurred for a second before he blinked them clear. "I never was good at saying things the right way. I worked better with my hands than my voice. But there are things I need you to know, things I should have said when I could still look you in the eye." He paused, listening to the quiet around him, the ticking clock, the faint creak of the house settling. "You thought I cared more about money than about you. I understand why. I said no too often. I made you feel small when I was trying to make you safe. That's on me." Jake felt something catch in his chest. He ran his thumb along the edge of the paper, tracing the faint indentation where the pen had dug into it. "Every dollar I saved was a piece of my time, time I didn't spend with you, time I can't get back. I told myself it was worth it if it meant you'd have choices. I never did. Maybe I was wrong about how I showed love, but I hope someday you'll see that's what it was." The sunlight shifted slightly, spilling over the page. He kept reading. I watched you grow from the window sometimes when you thought I wasn't paying attention, running down the driveway, laughing with friends, planning your future. I wanted to call out to you, to join you, but something always stopped me. Pride, maybe, or fear that I wouldn't fit in your world anymore. Jake's throat tightened. He could almost picture it, his father standing by the window, hands in his pockets, watching silently as life moved on without him. The money in that account isn't just numbers. It's hours, days, missed dinners. It's everything I could give, turned into something I hope will carry you further than I ever went. Don't waste it chasing things that disappear. Build something that lasts. Be the kind of man who leaves behind more than he takes. Jake exhaled shakily, the paper trembling in his grip. He wasn't crying yet, but his body felt like it might. And please forgive me for not saying this sooner. I was proud of you, every version of you, even when we fought. Even when you looked at me like I was a stranger. I never stopped being proud. The words blurred again, and this time he didn't fight it. Tears dropped onto the paper, small dark circles that spread slowly into the ink. He read the final lines aloud, barely above a whisper. If love was measured in words, I'd come up short. But if it's measured in effort, I hope I gave you enough to understand what I meant. I wasn't saving money. I was saving you. There was no signature, no farewell. Just that, a line that ended where the pen had pressed a little too hard, leaving a tiny tear in the page. Jake sat there for a long time, the letter open in front of him, the morning light growing warmer, softer. He could almost hear his father's voice in the room, not the stern one that filled his teenage years, but the quieter tone that used to come out on long drives, when conversation turned into small, careful truths. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat along the old creases, and slipped it back into the envelope. Then he reached for his father's old wallet, the one he had mocked not long ago. The leather was worn smooth, still carrying the faint smell of oil and tobacco. He opened it, slid the letter inside, and placed it back in the drawer beside the kitchen window. Some things, he thought, should stay where they belonged, close to where they were written. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. His mother appeared, eyes swollen from sleep. She saw the wallet on the table and the look on his face. "Did you find something?" she asked. He nodded slowly, his voice soft. "A letter. Not the one from the bank, another one, the real one." She didn't ask to read it. She just reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers cold, trembling slightly. They sat there together as the light filled the kitchen, not speaking, just breathing in the silence that had once divided them, now changed into something tender. Jake glanced toward the window. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, scattering petals from the dogwood in the yard. It reminded him of the way his father used to stand there, quiet, steady, unnoticed. He squeezed his mother's hand once and whispered. He was right. He wasn't saving money. He was saving us. And for the first time since the funeral, the silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt like presence, like love, finally heard. Weeks passed after the funeral, but the house refused to move on. It carried grief like an old scent in the walls, faint, persistent, impossible to scrub away. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like memory. Every silence felt inhabited. Jake tried to return to routine. He went to work, answered messages, smiled when expected. But inside, something had shifted. The rhythm of his life, fast, careless, full of small distractions, now moved slower, as if every action demanded reflection. He noticed things he'd ignored before. The dent on the kitchen chair his father used to lean back on. The faint grease mark near the garage door where his hand had always rested. The jar of coins still sitting on the shelf, lid half closed. Little traces of a man he'd misjudged, now turned relics of regret. One evening he came home to find his mother sitting at the table surrounded by unopened envelopes and a half-finished cup of tea. Her hair was loose, silver strands catching the light from the lamp. She looked up at him, eyes tired but steady. "I've been going through the papers your father left," she said. "He kept everything, receipts, notes, even thank-you cards from the shop." She slid a small stack toward him. "He also left a list. I think it was for me." Jake picked it up. The handwriting was familiar, blocky and careful. It wasn't a letter this time, just a series of bullet points. Mortgage paid off early, kids' tuition secure, insurance for the house, remind them to live simply. And at the bottom, one line written in heavier ink. "Don't let pride make you lonely." Jake read it twice. Then a third time. The words stung because they felt like they were written for him too. He thought about pride. how much of it he'd inherited without realizing, how it had lived quietly in him all those years, dressed up as confidence, disguised as independence. He'd always believed that admitting fault was weakness, that love should be shown through achievement, not apology. Now, standing in the shadow of his father's humility, his own pride felt cheap. He looked at his mother. "He knew we'd need to hear that," he said. She smiled faintly. "He always knew what to say when it was too late to say it." Her voice broke a little on the last word. Later that night, Jake went out to the garage. He hadn't been there since the funeral. The air was cool and smelled faintly of dust and oil. The light bulb flickered once before steadying, casting soft shadows over the workbench. He ran his hand across the tools, neatly arranged, untouched. The small tin box was still there under the shelf, where the hidden letter had once been kept. He opened it and found only a few spare bolts and washers now, but the emptiness of it felt symbolic, like the last echo of his father's secrets, all finally spoken. He sat down on the old stool and let the quiet settle around him. For the first time, he tried to imagine his father's life from the inside out, the exhaustion, the small humiliations, the thousand invisible acts of care no one thanked him for, and the pride that must have held him together when love went unseen. When his sister came home from college that weekend, she found him in the garage, sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands. She laughed softly. "You look just like him." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said. She looked around the space, her expression soft. "I used to think this place was depressing," she admitted. "Now it feels peaceful." Jake nodded. "Maybe that's what Dad was trying to teach us. Peace doesn't come from having everything, it comes from living with what you've earned." She smiled, but her eyes glistened. He'd like that. That night after everyone had gone to bed, Jake sat on the back porch with a blanket over his shoulders. The air smelled of rain-soaked grass and smoke from a neighbor's fire pit. He took out his phone, scrolled through old messages, and stopped at the last one from his father. It was nothing special, just a short note sent months before the heart attack. "Oil change done. Don't forget to check your brakes. Love, Dad." He stared at it for a long time, the words simple and unassuming. They were exactly like the man who'd written them, practical on the surface, full of care underneath. He typed a reply he couldn't send. "I get it now." Then he locked the phone and set it beside him. The next morning he did something he'd been avoiding. He went through his own bank account, subscriptions, purchases, all the meaningless clutter of convenience. He started canceling things. The gym membership he never used. The delivery app he relied on too often. The extra streaming service. Each cancellation felt like peeling away a layer of noise. He didn't do it out of guilt. He did it because, for the first time, he understood what it meant to value what lasts. He moved a portion of his paycheck into a savings account. Not much, just enough to matter. When the screen prompted him to name the account, he typed, "Legacy Fund." He stared at it for a while, then smiled through the sting in his eyes. That evening, as the sun dipped low, his mother found him fixing the porch light, the same one his father had repaired countless times. The bulb flared, warm and steady. "He'd be proud," she said quietly. Jake turned to her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Maybe, but I think he'd also tell me to stop waiting for his approval and just live." She laughed, a small, fragile sound, but real. And for a brief moment, the house didn't feel haunted by memory anymore. It felt guided by it. The light hummed above them, casting a soft glow across the porch. Jake looked out at the yard, the sky turning from orange to blue, and thought about the line on that list again. "Don't let pride make you lonely." He whispered it to himself, not as regret, but as a vow. The letter from the university arrived on a Tuesday morning. The mailman had left it wedged halfway in the box, the corner bent by the wind. Jake's sister, Emily, found it first. She stood on the porch for a long moment, staring at the return address printed in crisp blue ink, University of Michigan Office of Admissions. Her heart thudded once hard against her ribs. Inside, the kitchen still carried the faint smell of coffee and lemon cleaner. Jake was sitting at the table, reviewing paperwork for his own job, when she burst in, envelope trembling in her hands. "It came," she whispered. He looked up slowly, blinking at the letter like it was something alive. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he nodded. "Go ahead." Her fingers fumbled with the flap, tearing it slightly. The paper inside was thick and official, the kind that seemed to hum with possibility. She read the first line silently, lips parting, eyes wide. Then she laughed, a sound that carried through the quiet house like sunlight breaking through a storm. "I got in," she said. "Jake, I got in." He stood, and before he could stop himself, he pulled her into a hug. It was tight, clumsy, a little too long, the kind of embrace that fills all the spaces words can't reach. "That's amazing," he said, his voice unsteady with pride. Their father's words echoed somewhere in the back of his mind, "Build something that lasts," and suddenly he understood. This moment was what the years of saving had been for. Emily leaned back, smiling through tears. "They offered a partial scholarship, too," she said, "but the rest of the tuition—" Her voice trailed off. Jake knew what she meant. He also knew what to say. "It's covered," he said simply. "Dad made sure of that." She frowned slightly. "But that fund," Jake shook his head with a small smile. "I never touched my share. It was always meant for you. That's what he wanted." That afternoon they found their mother in the garden, kneeling among rows of marigolds their father had planted seasons ago. Her hands were dirt-streaked, her face calm in the golden light. When Emily told her the news, she closed her eyes for a moment, not in surprise but in quiet gratitude. "Of course you got in," she said, brushing the soil from her palms. "Your father always said you would." She looked up at the sky then, as if speaking to someone beyond it. "I hope you're watching this, Tom." The three of them stood there for a while, the wind lifting petals across the yard. The house behind them seemed softer somehow, lighter, as though it too was exhaling after years of holding its breath. That night Jake went into his father's study. It hadn't changed much. The faint smell of machine oil still clung to the desk. The old lamp still flickered when he switched it on. The tin box that had once held the letter was still tucked under the shelf, now empty but for a single key taped inside the lid. Jake turned it over in his hand. Etched on the metal were 3 small letters, U.M. He smiled, of course. He opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and there it was, a folder labeled College Fund. Inside, receipts, transfers, bank statements, all meticulously kept. But at the very top, a note written in his father's steady hand: "For Emily's education. Use it well. Make her believe in herself before the world tries to make her doubt." Jake traced the words with his thumb. His chest tightened. Not with sorrow this time, but with something warmer, deeper. Legacy. In the weeks that followed, the house transformed in small ways. Laughter returned first, tentative but real. Then music, soft jazz on the radio, something their mother played while cooking. Even the light felt different. Emily spent her evenings filling out forms, shopping for textbooks online, and talking about dorms and classes. Her excitement was electric, contagious. Jake found himself staying up with her, reviewing schedules, sharing advice he wished someone had given him years ago. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he caught glimpses of their father in her, the tilt of her head when she was focused, the quiet determination behind her smile. It was uncanny and comforting. One night, as she packed, she found the old family photo album buried under a pile of clothes. She flipped through it slowly: birthdays, fishing trips, crooked Christmas tree from their childhood. Then she stopped on a picture of their father sitting on the porch, sun in his eyes, smiling with his hands folded over his knees. Jake sat beside her. "Do you ever wish you could say one more thing to him?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I think he said everything he needed to. We just didn't know how to listen before." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm going to make him proud." Jake smiled. "You already have." The day Emily left for college, the morning was clear and bright. They loaded the car, boxes, blankets, notebooks, a framed photo of their father for her dorm desk. Their mother hugged her at least 3 times before letting go. As Jake closed the trunk, he noticed something wedged in the side pocket, his father's old wrench, polished and clean. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. Someone, probably their mother, had tied a small tag to it. On it were 4 words, written in her neat handwriting. "He'd want you to." Jake smiled, tucking it safely into Emily's bag. When he looked up, she was watching him from the driver's seat, her eyes bright. "You coming to visit?" she asked. "Every chance I get," he said. As the car pulled away, he stood in the driveway, the hum of the engine fading into the distance. The yard was quiet except for the whisper of the wind through the trees. He looked at the sky, wide, endless, and imagined his father somewhere beyond it, maybe standing in that same work jacket, hands in his pockets, watching. The dream that had begun in silence, funded by sacrifice, was finally moving forward. Jake exhaled slowly, letting the air fill him, grounding him. The college dream lived on, not in a bank account, not in a letter, but in the laughter of his sister, in the steady courage she carried with her, and in the unseen hand that had made it all possible. He whispered into the wind, almost smiling, "You did it, Dad." And this time the silence that answered didn't feel empty. It felt eternal. It had been a year since Emily left for college. The house was quieter now, not empty, just different. The kind of quiet that feels earned, like a song reaching its final, gentle note. Jake still lived there with their mother. He'd taken over most of the repairs, the squeaky porch step, the leaky faucet, the light that flickered over the sink. Small things. But every time he fixed one, he felt a strange peace, as if his hands were finishing the work his father never got to complete. The old wrench, the one with the tag that read "He'd want you to," hung on a hook by the kitchen door. Not as a tool anymore, but as a reminder of effort, of love that never asked for applause. Emily called every weekend. Her voice, once uncertain and shy, now carried a new energy, alive with the world she was discovering. She talked about classes, professors, new friends. But most of all, she talked about how grateful she was. "Every time I walk across campus," she said one night, "I think about him, about how he made this possible without ever telling us. It's like I can feel him here." Jake smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "He'd be proud of you," he said softly. Then, after a pause, "He'd be proud of both of us, I think." That winter, Jake and his mother visited the grave. The cemetery was quiet under a blanket of snow. The headstones stood like small islands of memory, each one with its own story carved in stone. They brought fresh flowers, yellow chrysanthemums, his mother's choice. Jake brushed the snow away from the name etched into granite, Thomas Miller, 1964–2024. For a while they said nothing. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, but neither of them moved to leave. Finally, his mother whispered, "You know, sometimes I still wait for the door to open, for him to walk in complaining about the traffic or asking what's for dinner." Jake nodded. "I do too." She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He didn't know how to say it out loud, but he loved you so much. You were his mirror, Jake. He just didn't know how to talk to his own reflection. Her voice trembled, but there was a kind of peace in it too, the peace of understanding, long delayed but finally arrived. Jake placed his gloved hand on the headstone. "I know," he said, "I know now." When spring returned, the world seemed lighter. The trees in the yard bloomed again. The same dogwood that his father had planted years ago now spilled white petals across the grass. Sometimes Jake would sit on the porch after work, a cup of coffee in hand, and just watch them drift through the air. The wind carried sounds he had once ignored, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of distant laughter from passing kids, the creak of the old gate. They all felt like conversation now, as if life itself was speaking the words his father couldn't. One afternoon, Emily came home for the summer. She was different, older somehow, not just in age but in presence. Her confidence filled the space that used to echo with uncertainty. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, she pulled something from her bag, a small essay folded neatly in half. "I had to write about a personal hero," she said, handing it to their mother. "I thought you might want to read it." Her mother unfolded it carefully. The title at the top read, "If Your Father Was Like Mine." She read the first line aloud, her voice shaking slightly. "They say heroes are loud, brave, larger than life. But my father was quiet, steady, and sometimes misunderstood. He didn't fight battles on battlefields. He fought them in grocery stores, in late nights, in the way he said no when everyone else said yes." Jake sat still as she continued reading. Each sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of understanding, the kind that only comes from growing up, looking back, and finally seeing the full picture. "He saved not for himself, but for us. Every dollar he didn't spend was another day he worked for a dream we hadn't even dreamed yet. I used to think he was cheap. Now I know he was generous in the only way that mattered." By the time she reached the end, her mother was crying. So was Jake. Emily wiped her own eyes and said softly, "I wanted people to know that not all heroes wear medals. Some wear work boots and never ask to be thanked." Her mother reached across the table and held her hand. "He'd love this," she whispered. Jake nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jake stepped out into the yard. The sky was clear, a deep navy scattered with stars. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and spring rain. He sat on the steps, the same spot where his father used to drink his coffee before work. And for the first time he spoke out loud, not as a son trying to be understood, but as a man speaking to another man. "You were right," he said quietly. "Pride cost us time, words, maybe even years, but you left something better than any apology. You left proof." He glanced up at the stars. "I get it now. You weren't saving money, you were saving us from limits, from fear, from small dreams. And now Emily's out there, living the future you built." The wind stirred again, brushing softly against his hair, and he could almost imagine a response in it, something like a quiet laugh, the kind his father used to give when words weren't needed. As the night deepened, Jake thought about all the fathers like his, men who built their love out of labor, who expressed affection through sacrifice, who never said "I love you" because they were too busy proving it. Men who worked in silence while their families misunderstood them, until one day it was too late to say thank you. He thought about the lessons hidden in that kind of love, lessons that don't shout but stay. Love isn't always a gift wrapped in words. Sometimes it's a receipt kept in a wallet, a jar of coins that never empties, or a hand that keeps fixing what's broken even when no one notices. Sometimes the people who seem hardest to love are the ones who love the hardest. They just don't know how to show it in a way the world applauds. And pride, that invisible wall, is often the true thief. It robs fathers of softness and sons of understanding. It silences the words both sides mean to say. "I need you. I'm proud of you. I love you too." Jake took a deep breath, the cool air filling his chest. He looked toward the house, the warm glow of the kitchen light spilling onto the grass, and smiled. The story that had begun with misunderstanding had ended in clarity. And that, he thought, was enough. If your father was like him, if he was quiet, if he was hard to read, if he said no more than yes and saved when others spent, maybe he wasn't being cold. Maybe he was building something, a future, a safety net, a way to love that didn't use words but endurance. Maybe he carried love like a secret, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he didn't know how to share it without it feeling too fragile. If your father was like him, call him, visit him, ask about his day. Tell him you see him not for what he gives but for what he carries. Because one day his chair will be empty and you'll realize the quiet he left behind wasn't silence. It was legacy. And if he's already gone, don't let regret be the final chapter. Honor him by living with the same quiet strength, by being patient where he was misunderstood, generous where he was cautious, and brave enough to love loudly where he couldn't. That's how we continue their story. That's how we make their sacrifices worth something. Dear listeners, if this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone who once carried more than he said, then take a moment tonight to reach out. Tell your father, your mother, your family that you see them, that you're grateful, that you love them not for their perfection, but for their persistence. Because in the end, love isn't about how much we say it. It's about how deeply we live it. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it spoke to your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. And may your home, wherever it is, whatever it looks like, always be filled with understanding, forgiveness, and love that endures quietly, like a father's hands that never stopped working for you. Good night, and may your family be blessed with peace, health, and love.